Hello students, I hope you all are doing great. Welcome back to the daily news analysis. Today we will be understanding the important news articles of 5th of April 2022 with your educator Prithviraj Singh. Let us begin. Guys, as we discussed a few days back on the 1st of April, there was an article that we discussed, we telecasted on our daily news analysis classes about the criminal procedure identification bill. Now it was being tabled in the Lok Sabha, and yesterday it was being passed in Lok Sabha. As you know that it would be repealing the Identification of Prisoners Act 1922, right? So we have already telecasted the session on the DNA, and the link for the same would be given at the bottom on the channel. You can visit that very important news article video explained by me. So in short, I would say that this bill which is being passed in the Lok Sabha would amend the Identification of Prisoners Act 1920. Now this was a British era act, and it limited the scope of the measurements in the sense that it was limiting the measurements to just the finger impressions and the the foot impressions, whereas the new bill increases the scope of the measurements. It includes the physical, biological samples, including retina and iris scan, right, of the convicted, arrested, as well as detained persons, right. So in this sense, it has increased the scope of the criminal procedure, right. So you can watch the session given on the bottom of the link, right. So we telecasted on 29th of March 2022. You can see that, right. And we have also discussed that there are many opposition parties which are actually rejecting this bill. They are opposing this bill. They believe that this is this would be violative of Article 20 Clause 3. This would also be violative of right to privacy, and at the same time it may be misused because it also includes the preventive those who are under preventive detention, right. And which ways you can read about the same, right. Guys, there has been also news about the Uniform Civil Code, and in the run up to the 2024 general elections, the debate over the Uniform Civil Code has taken or has gained the momentum. Guys, we all know that in India the religious communities have their own personal laws, like the Hindu code bill, the Shariat, right, the Muslim personal laws, so on and so forth. And the government feels that there are different interpretations of the laws, right, with regard to the marriages, with regard to adoption, divorce, inheritance, so on and so forth, right. Although it is mentioned under Article 44 of the Directive Principles of State Policy, which entails that the state shall endeavor to take actions to ensure the application of Uniform Civil Code, right, but it is not still been done because of various reasons. So but again the debate has resurfaced. We all know, guys, the Uniform Civil Code talks about one law applicable to all religious communities, right. That means एक law होना चाहिए सभी religious communities के लिए, and it should deal with the matters related to marriage, divorce, inheritance and adoption. So there would be 4 matters which would be deliberated under this, right. Guys, there are many experts who believe that we have uniform criminal code. That means there is only one criminal code applicable to all the communities, irrespective of their different religious ideologies, right. So when we have one criminal code, why don't we have one civil code, right? Because religious laws are civil laws, right, they are the civil code. So there are being talks that why not we have a common civil law, right, or one civil code as we have one criminal code. Now it has been seen that the Uttarakhand Chief Minister for the second time he is being elected, Pushkar Singh Dhami, and yes, he in his election manifesto he promised to announce an expert panel which would deliberate over the uniform civil code, that means one civil code. At the same time, the BJP member in Rajya Sabha, Mr. Rakesh Sinha, has also moved a private member's bill for the law on uniform civil code. At the same time, the Chancellor of the Maulana Azad National Urdu University have also asked the Supreme Court to direct the government to constitute the law for the uniform civil code in time, right? So there have been many deliberations about the same. Guys, if I talk about the uniform civil code, it simplifies the personal laws, right, the religious laws, and would be applicable to all the religious communities in matters of marriage, inheritance, adoption and divorce, right? Because if we go today to the court, there are different laws for different religious communities, right? And therefore Article 44 ensures that Article 44 ensures that the Uniform Civil Code would promote religious harmony, and would also protect the interest and the rights of the women, right? It says Article 44, which is a part of the Directive Principles or DPSP, part 4 of the Constitution, right? Now they talk about having a uniform civil code, and it says that the state shall endeavor to secure a uniform civil code for the citizens throughout the territory of the country, right? Even B.R. Ambedkar, in his speech in the Constituent Assembly, said that the Uniform Civil Code is incorporated in the Constitution as a desirable move, but for the moment it is voluntarily, right? So for the moment it is voluntary, but it is something which is desirable, right? And and the states should endeavor, desire to secure a uniform civil code, right? So in this sense, when it is being enacted, it would simplify the personal laws, and and all the Hindu code bill and the Shariat law and all the religious personal laws would be merged into one common civil code, right? And that will be applicable to all the citizens irrespective of their faith, right? So we are clear with Article 44, which is Directive Principle, which talks about Uniform Civil Code, and we have also learned the important benefits if we'll have the religious code, and it would be applicable to the matters of marriage, divorce, inheritance and adoption, right? Guys, the third news article, very important, although some disturbing images would be there on the screen, but it is something which has to be explored. Putin should face war crimes trial, as said by Joe Biden, the president of America. Guys, in the northwest of Kyiv, the capital of Ukraine, there is a place called as Bucha, and in the Bucha there are being alleged war crimes, atrocities and violations, humanitarian violations, right? And therefore Joe Biden has said that the International Criminal Court should take the action against Vladimir Putin against the war crimes. As you can see on the screen, guys, there have been reports of the atrocities against the civilians in Bucha, Ukraine, right? And America is calling for a war crimes trial against Vladimir Putin, right? So here you can see the city of Bucha near Kyiv, to the northwest of Kyiv, and how the properties are being vandalized, people are being killed. It has been said that more than 500 people, civilians, are being killed in Bucha, right? Some disturbing images on the screen, the photo of Bucha civilians reportedly killed by Russian soldiers, right? So we have to show these disturbing images to actually understand the gravity of the issue. Guys, recently the International Criminal Court, which is headquartered at The Hague, Netherlands, announced that it would open an investigation into the possible war crimes against humanity in Ukraine, right? Guys, if I talk about the war crimes are the violations of humanitarian laws during a conflict. So iske andar the thing that you have to understand is that there should be a violation of humanitarian laws during a conflict. मतलब कॉन्फ्लिक्ट एरिया के अंदर या वॉर टोन एरिया के अंदर अगर ह्यूमैनिटेरियन लॉज का वायलेशन होता है तब जाके ही वो इसको वॉर क्राइम्स की कैटेगरी में इंक्लूड किया जाएगा, राइट? सो द डेफिनेशन वाज एस्टैब्लिश्ड अंडर द रोम स्टैट्यूट ऑफ द इंटरनेशनल क्रिमिनल कोर्ट, राइट? सो यहाँ पे वी हैव अ सेकंड टेक अवे, द रोम स्टैट्यूट ऑफ द इंटरनेशनल क्रिमिनल कोर्ट, and this is something which is derived from the 1949 Geneva Conventions. Very important, Geneva Conventions, and it is based on the idea that individuals can be held liable for the actions of the state or its military, right? Guys, to be declared as a war crime there must be a violation of humanitarian laws, right? In the war-torn areas, in the conflict areas where there are two conflicting parties, right? Whereas if I compare it with genocide, genocide is something which takes place during the peace time, right? So therefore there is a difference between genocide and war crimes, right? What happened in Kashmir in 1990s is a genocide because we are not in war in that particular state or country, right? So it was not a war-torn area, it was not a conflict zone, and there were alleged genocide against the Kashmiri Pandits, you know, in 1990s in Kashmir. So that is called as genocide. What is happening in Bucha near in Kiev, near Kiev in Ukraine is a war crime because it is a war-torn area and there are two conflicting belligerent parties, Ukraine and Russia, right? So therefore there is a difference between genocide and war crime. I hope it is clear, right? And this has been derived from the Rome Statute of the ICC, which comes from the Geneva Convention, you know, which lays down the guideline for the for the war crimes, prevention of war crimes, the status of prisoners of war, and you know the rights of the prisoners of war and the treatment that is to be given for the prisoners of war, right? So in this sense, 1949 Geneva Convention. So guys, Russian war in Ukraine, Russia has violated the Geneva Convention of 1949, right? Even guys, the United Nations Office on Genocide Prevention and the Responsibility to Protect separates the war crimes from the genocide, as I just mentioned, and as I've explained that the war crimes are defined as something occurring in a domestic conflict, you know, or a war between the two states, right? While genocide and crimes against humanity happen in peacetime, right, as I just mentioned. And there are three principles which would declare or would, you know, help us in deciding whether it is a war crime or genocide. The principle of distinction, proportionality and precaution, right? So so the key takeaways from this slide is 1949 Geneva Convention, then International Criminal Court, and what is the difference between war crime and genocide, right? Very important takeaways from this slide. Guys, who is a war criminal? Now, as per the international law, anyone who violates a set of rules adopted by world leaders known as the law of armed conflict. So guys, it's not that when you are in a military operation or when you are in war with some country, you don't follow rules and principles. There are rules and laws governing the wars also, right? Also called as laws of war, right? In the international law, there is a theme called as law of wars, right? So the law of wars or the law of the armed conflict should be adhered, should be followed, right? So if someone who violates the law of the wars, international law of the wars, then he you know, can be convicted or can be declared as a war criminal. Those rules who have been modified and expanded over the past century, drawn from Geneva Conventions in the aftermath of World War II, right? So we have understood that Geneva Convention happened in the year 1949 and in the aftermath of World War II, right? The rules are aimed at protecting people not taking part in fighting and those who can no longer fight, right? So that means if there are some atrocities against the civilians, like doctors, nurses, wounded troops, the prisoners of war, they all are being included, right? The person would be held as a war criminal, right? Treaties and protocols lay out who can be targeted, and so even the law of the war also, declares that who can be targeted, which area can be targeted, with what weapons, and certain weapons definitely are prohibited, like the chemical and the biological weapons, right? So it decides that what all weapons would be used in the war and who can be targeted, right? So that there is a minimal destruction to civilian property and life. I hope we are clear with the war crimes. So guys, the so-called grave breaches of the conventions that amount to war crimes include the willful killing and extensive destruction of property, right, and deliberate targeting of the civilians. Now if it is being proved in the International Criminal Court, definitely the court has to look into many evidences, right? So until unless it doesn't get the evidences, it cannot declare any person or authority as a war criminal, right? So it has to find the the solid evidences, right? So the first thing here is that there should be willful killing and extensive destruction of property, deliberately targeting civilians, using disproportionate force, and using human shields and taking hostages. So these all categories actually declare something as as a war crime. And all the abuses like the murder, extermination, forcible transfer, torture, rape and sexual slavery during war comes under war crime. So guys, the President of America, Joe Biden, is asking the International Criminal Court to actually book Vladimir Putin under the war crime. So the Geneva Convention was ratified by the Soviet in the year 1954, and Russia in 2019 revoked its recognition of one of the protocols, correct, but remains a signatory to the rest of the agreements. Now a very important takeaway from this explanation and this slide in particular is that neither Russia nor Ukraine is a member of International Criminal Court, and I expect a question on this, guys, very important. Neither Russia nor Ukraine is a part of international or is a member of International Criminal Court. दोनों ही member नहीं है, and Moscow does not recognize the tribunal, right? So Moscow do not recognize International Criminal Court, but Ukraine has given its approval to examine the alleged atrocities after the annexation of Crimea in the year 2014, right? But they both are not the members of International Criminal Court. Now Russia may decide not to cooperate with the ICC, and any trial would be delayed until a defendant is arrested, right? So definitely the ICC has to look into the reasonable grounds, and it has to find the solid evidences that of the video and the audio tapes may be collected, right? So that to bring Vladimir Putin to the box. I hope it is clear. All right. Definitely Moscow is almost certain to refuse to comply with the arrest warrants, and previously, guys, ICC International Criminal Court judges have convicted 5 people of war crimes and crimes against humanity and genocide, and acquitted 4 others, right? So International Criminal Court has till date convicted 5 people of war crimes crimes against humanity and genocide. At the same time, it has also acquitted 4 others, right? So 5 have been convicted by the ICC judges and 4 have been acquitted. The Congo warlord Thomas Lubanga Dieli was convicted in the year 2012 from Congo. Similarly, Joseph Kony, right, the leader of the Lord's Resistance Army in Uganda, was also being convicted. Similarly, International Criminal Court also started the trials for the former Yugoslavia to examine crimes that took place during the Balkan Wars, right? So in this sense, ICC has played an important role in actually stopping the international war crimes, at the same time the genocide. I hope it is clear. Guys, coming to the editorial section. On the screen, very important article by Dr. Faizan Mustafa, the Vice Chancellor of the Nalsar, Hyderabad. Now the article talks about the road to Ukraine peace, or the road to Ukraine peace runs through New Delhi. Now it actually, the author tries to explain the importance or the important role that Delhi has to play in the peace plan or the peace process. So it would be talking about the role of mediation and how the various united international laws talk about mediation and what were the incidents in the past of mediation which helped different countries in resolving the conflicts. Guys, definitely the Russian invasion of Ukraine is a clear violation of the international law. It is a clear violation of very important Budapest Memorandum, right? Budapest Memorandum, which was being signed after the end of the Cold War, post the disintegration of the Soviet in the year 1994, right? And it was against Ukraine, Belarus, right? Because they had the nuclear weapons and they became the signatories of NPT, right? So they gave up their nuclear weapons under the Budapest Memorandum and they joined NPT on the condition that the Soviet, UK and United States would never use military or nuclear weapons against Ukraine and Belarus, right? But the war by Russia in Ukraine is a clear violation of the agreement called as Budapest Memorandum 1994. We would also exemplify further in the coming few slides, but very important takeaway, Budapest Memorandum. So Russia has violated international law. Putin may be booked under the war crimes. Russia has also violated the Budapest Memorandum of the year 1994. Definitely the economic sanctions which were being slashed by America on Russia has resulted into the increased inflation, rising to around more than 15%, right? And the dipping foreign exchange reserves. This war is disrupting the supply chains and is causing the fuel and food prices to surge, and it would definitely have its adverse impact across the world. Guys, many countries have tried to mediate, like Belarus as well as Turkey, but they all have failed. The parties have been negotiating over the positions rather than interests, right? The article explored the role of the mediation, and mediation, guys, the third party mediates between the two conflicting parties, and this is a third neutral party, right? Any neutral country mediating between the two conflict countries, right? And the author tries to explain that how New Delhi can play the role of mediator for the conflict resolution, and in this way mediation produces a win-win outcome, right? And it finds a solution without resorting to force. and due to its immense potential, the Charter of the United Nations under Article 33 recognizes the promise of international mediation for peaceful resolutions of international disputes, right? So another takeaway, the Charter of United Nations, Article 3 talks about mediation, right? So this also can be mentioned and kept in mind in the examination. So it recognizes the promise of international mediation for peaceful resolution of international disputes. So the best part about mediation is peaceful resolution. Peaceful resolution of the conflict. And there is a third party mediation. It's a neutral party. Right. So in this sense, the neutral party or the third party, does the power broking or brokering peace, right? And it happened in past also, and there are successful cases of mediation. Take for example, in the year 1978, the President of America, Jimmy Carter, mediated peace between Israel and Egypt, and they were called as Camp David Accords. Camp David Accords. In the year 1978, right? So US President Jimmy Carter did mediated peace between Israel and Egypt, and the mediating party was America, Jimmy Carter, right? So very important takeaway from this article, Camp David Accords 1978 mediated the peace between Israel and Egypt by United States, represented by President Jimmy Carter, right? So important takeaway, and this is called as, in layman terms, shuttle diplomacy. Shuttle diplomacy, where the conflicting parties keep their eyes on the prize, and the mediator shuttles between the party, so on and so forth, right? Guys, the war in Ukraine is a clear violation of Geneva Convention of 1949, which talks about the war crimes, the rights of the prisoners of war, so on and so forth. And mediation is a tool that avoids being reactive, right? Otherwise there are many other tools, but then they do not result into the win-win outcome for both the parties. The basic presumption behind mediation is the power parity between the disputing parties, but here there is a huge power imbalance between Russia and Ukraine, right? And in the Budapest Memorandum of 1994, Russia did all the big promises, the pinky promises to Ukraine, that it would never invade Ukraine, or it would never go ahead with the war against Ukraine, right? So Ukraine wants solidarity of the world. Definitely Germany has also suspended the Nord Stream 2 gas pipeline, and Finland and Sweden are also being pushed closer to the NATO membership, right? So Finland and Sweden are also being pushed to the NATO membership, right? So in this sense, guys, playing mediator in this dispute would be very helpful for India's long-term interest in countering Chinese threat, especially with a growing no limits partnership between Russia and China. We all know that post the invasion of Ukraine, there has been increasing nexus between Russia and China, and the only way India can do it, break it, is while mediating or playing the role of mediator. So in this sense, US and its allies need India as a strategic partner to balance the rise of China in Indo-Pacific. So guys, we have taken some important note from this article. The first is Budapest Memorandum of 1994, which says that the Russia would not go ahead with the war in Ukraine. We have also learned about the Camp David Accords, which talks about the role of mediator or the role of America in mediating peace among Israel and Egypt. We also have learned about Geneva Convention of 1949, number 3. We also have learned about the Charter of United Nations, Article 33. So this is the fourth takeaway, and it talks about the role of mediation. We have learned what is mediation, or how is mediation done as per the international law, right? So there are 4 or 5 takeaways from this article. So I believe it is clear. Just go through this article. It's an important one. So I've just explained the things in here in the slides. Guys, let us discuss about the Budapest Memorandum on Security Assurances. Guys, it is a compromise. It comprises in fact 3 identical political agreements signed at OSCE conference. OSCE is Organization for Security and Cooperation in Europe, right? And it is a it was created during the Cold War as a forum for discussion between the Western and the Eastern Bloc countries, right? So it talks about the arms control, right? So in this sense, the Budapest Memorandum it comprises the 3 political agreements, and it was signed at the OSCE conference in Budapest, Hungary in 1994, and it provides security assurances by its signatories, relating to the accession of Belarus, Kazakhstan and Ukraine into NPT, right? तो हुआ ये था guys, in 1994 when Budapest Memorandum was signed, यहाँ पे एक assurances दिए गए थे रशिया ने, यूएस ने और यूके ने बेलारूस, कजाकिस्तान और यूक्रेन को, because Ukraine, Kazakhstan and Belarus joined the NPT or Non-Proliferation Treaty on the condition that definitely they would give up the nuclear weapons, on the condition that Russia, UK or USA would not invade their territory, right? So the memorandum was originally signed by the 3 nuclear powers, the Russian Federation, UK and America, and China and France gave somewhat weaker individual assurances in separate documents. The memorandum prohibited the Russian Federation, the UK and the United States from threatening or using military force or economic coercion against Ukraine. That means US, UK and Russia would never use the military force or the economic coercion against Ukraine, Belarus and Kazakhstan except in self-defense or otherwise in accordance with the Charter of the United Nations. And as a result of these agreements and the memorandum between 1993 and 1996, these 3 countries, that is Belarus, Kazakhstan and Ukraine, gave up their nuclear weapons. So Budapest Memorandum is just a promise given by Russia, US and UK that they would not invade the territory or they would not inflict war on Ukraine, Belarus and Kazakhstan, right? And on the condition that definitely because these 3 countries were joining the Non-Proliferation Treaty, वो NPT ज्वाइन कर रहे थे, right? और वो इसी शर्त पे ज्वाइन कर रहे थे कि रशिया, यूएस और यूके उनको फ्यूचर में कभी इन्वेड नहीं करेगा, राइट? सो दिस इज ऑल अबाउट द बुडापेस्ट मेमोरेंडम. आई बिलीव इट इज क्लियर, very important, and I expect a question on this. Guys, let us learn about the OSCE, Organization for Security and Cooperation. We were also, when during the Russian war of Ukraine, when it started, there was something called as Minsk Accords. We learned in detail about the Minsk Accords, which was a tripartite agreement between Russia, Ukraine and the other countries, right? Where we learned that there would be no exchange of the heavy weapons between Russia and Ukraine, and although it failed, but then it was also being mediated by OSCE, right? Organization for Security and Cooperation in Europe. Now guys, this is an intergovernmental organization, and it is the world's largest regional security oriented organization, right? So it is the world's largest security oriented international organization with observer status at the United Nations, and the issues it mandates the issues such as the arms control, promotion of human rights, freedom of the press, and the free and fair elections, right? So these are its important thrust areas. It is headquartered at Vienna, Austria, and it is definitely was formed during the Cold War to actually it was acting as a forum of discussion between the Eastern Bloc, which was pro-Russian, and the Western Bloc, which was pro-West. There are 57 participating countries, mostly in Europe, but there are few members present in Asia as well as North America. I hope we are clear with OSCE as well as the Budapest Memorandum, and I expect a question on this, very important for law students as well as those preparing for the UPSC examination. Guys, coming to the next news article, sliding in Sri Lanka. We all know guys that Sri Lanka is undergoing an economic turmoil, economic crisis, and there are many reasons for that. Sri Lanka is spiraling into a political crisis, right? And this economic distress has led Sri Lanka into a political crisis. Even the governor of the central bank has put up his papers, and people are protesting the government because the government is basically a family-run government. Because the president of Sri Lanka, Gotabaya Rajapakse, is being protested of mishandling the economic crisis, distress, and even the Prime Minister Mahinda Rajapakse is also being criticized. So they all demand that the Gotabaya Rajapakse should resign, and they are raising the slogan called as Gota Go Home, right? Now in order to resolve the economic crisis, he invoked the emergency laws and declared curfew in the city. Guys, this article is being taken from Indian Express, and all his brothers, the four brothers, Gotabaya, Mahinda, Shamal and Basil, are in the government. Now the president Sri Lanka, Gotabaya Rajapakse, is calling the opposition members to come ahead and to resolve the crisis, but the opposition is in no mood to actually to coordinate and cooperate with the government, and they are asking for the quick resignation or removal of the president and his cabinet, right? Guys, so this article says that there are multiple factors behind the current crisis in Colombo. First is the short-sighted and reckless borrowing by Sri Lanka to build infrastructure projects. So Sri Lanka has borrowed a huge amount of money for financing its infrastructure projects, and these projects have been turned into white elephant. White elephants means something which are not working well, and in fact have become a burden or liability on the government. At the same time, there has been also restrictions on the fertilizer imports, right? So Sri Lanka also imposed restrictions on the fertilizer imports, plus there have been also unexpected events such as 2019 Easter bombings, right? So there were some terror attacks also, plus definitely the pandemic. So all these four factors have contributed to the collapse of the economy, right? So the first is the reckless borrowing, and many of it was coming from China. Guys, India has opened its credit line and has given huge amount of money to Sri Lanka so that it can come out from the economic crisis. We all know that Sri Lanka is also the member of BIMSTEC, Bay of Bengal initiative of multi-sectoral and technical and economic cooperation. So India and Sri Lanka was the chair of the recently had BIMSTEC conference, and India, was also participated in Indian Prime Minister also participated in this virtual conference. So they did deliberated about the economic crisis of Sri Lanka and how it can be resolved. It is said that India had given the credit line and supply of essential goods from India, and although there is high inflation and shortages, the civil liberties of the people have been curtailed by the government. Sri Lankan government has also imposed emergency in the country, and it is facing the worst economic crisis in its history. It is because of many thinkers believe that it is because of the heavy decentralization and of the political power. It has always remained in the hands of the Rajapaksa family, and it has resulted into the civil war that lasted nearly 3 decades. Right. Even the state was violent over the state's violent crackdown on the ultra-left Janata Vimukti Peramuna's insurrections left the southern district bruised, and the long years of emergency during the war caused the militarization of the society, as happened in Jaffna. And however, the halo of winning the war against the Tamil Tigers allowed them to escape the censor against them, right? So a good article from Indian Express, and I would be soon coming up with the daily analysis of the Sri Lankan crisis also, right? So that's all for today, guys. I hope you enjoyed the session. Wish you all the best. I'll see you in the next class. Good day, goodbye.